Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me, in behalf of my minister, to be here. She would have loved to be with you today, but you know how the schedule of ministers is sometimes. So I have the honor to deliver her speech, and I'm very grateful to do so and see all of you here in Berlin. First of all, I would love to say welcome to Berlin. Well, my president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, was pointing out it precisely. Nobody should be forced to decide, do I want to stay or do I have to leave? Nobody should be forced to decide, do I risk that my home will be destroyed by the next flood when I'm staying? Do we risk that the next drought will ruin our harvest again? Or in avoiding that risk, should we leave and then losing not only our home, but also our community, our history, our personal history, our livelihoods, and part of what we are, how our life is constructed and how we like to live. That is a question nobody should be asked to. But millions of people today, for them it's not something abstract, for them it's reality, unfolding every day. And it shows climate change is not only an environmental crisis, it's also a human crisis. Across the globe we have seen the pictures, we have seen the videos, droughts, floods, storms, rising sea levels are already influencing how people live and whether they can remain in their homes. More and more people are being displaced by extreme weather events, and most of them in their own countries. According to the Internal Displacement Management Center, natural disaster it triggered the displacement of almost 30 million people in the past year, in 2025. The number remains near record highs. And the latest report of the IDMC shows the conflict and climate-related disaster increasingly overlap. In 42 countries, people moved due to conflict and violence as well as disasters. This overlap makes vulnerable communities even more fragile and increases displacement. This vicious circle is seen in many places around the globe. Recurrent droughts and periods of floods have combined with decades of armed conflict and insecurity, forcing millions of people to leave their homes. We see that on many places. Multiple risks for peace, security, and stability arise out of climate change. We see that chain reaction. There is no rain, or heavy rainfalls, then there's a drought coming, the wells run dry, livestock dies, pastures turn to dust. Communities are forced to compete for little water they have, and grazing ground remain. This leads to rivalry, families who lost everything end up in crowded camps, no income, no way home. And that is exactly then the power vacuum which armed groups exploit, controlling water, taxing the desperate, recruiting those with nothing to lose. Climate change does not start the war, but it lights the fuse. Internationally, human mobility has long been recognized as a central dimension of climate change. This has been shown at the COPs and other international policy processes, like the Global Compact for Migration and the Task Force on Displacement under the Paris Agreement. However, that's not enough. The focus should not longer be only simply in recognizing the fact on climate mobility, but also, and that's why we are here, but also on coordinated action and concrete partnership. On how to scale implementation worldwide to respond to this human crisis and prevent further negative consequences. And that is exactly why you all were coming to Berlin. That's exactly why the Berlin Climate Mobility Forum is so important. It reflects growing global commitment. It was said so eloquently, and it was sending out such a positive message. I want to thank you for that, Professor Abelkamp. That was really very, very inspiring. It brings together governments, international organizations, affected communities, researchers, and financial institutions. And together, we are defining the climate mobility principles and a plan for action. We share the global strengthening prevention, the goal of strengthening prevention, adaptation, resilience, protection, and solutions for people and communities, and especially on the front lines of the climate crisis. Because no country can address these challenges by itself. It's so important that we cooperate together. And you were, Mr. President, you were exactly pointing on that we have to cooperate, that multilateral cooperation is key to this solution, to the solution of the crisis. As I was pointing out, the crises are overlapping, they are growing, and also political pressure is growing. And that's why we need this coordination and this cooperation, and we need multilateral action even more than in times before. Climate impact does not stop at borders, and neither should our responses. And that is why Germany and also my Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, we are focusing on exactly that cooperation, even more strategically and closely, and especially directed on the people's realities and on the contexts on the ground. And that means three things for us. First thing is prevention and adaptation. Second point, safe and dignified mobility. Third point, supporting receiving regions and cities. It means for us investing in the resilience and stability of societies, and to invest in the risk reduction and especially in adaptation strategies to secure livelihoods and in opening up new opportunities. And it means for us we have to create new partnership on every level, globally, regionally, and especially locally. We work together to make sure that people have real choices. The choice to stay where they are, if they wish to do so. The option to move safely with dignity if migration becomes inevitable. How do we achieve those goals in practical terms? Let me add a few comments to the three principles I was just pointing out. First, prevention and adaptation. We are working strongly together with our partner countries, and we aim to enhance climate resilience. Let me give you a few short examples. In partnership with the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, a human mobility watch system is being developed that can forecast climate and disaster-related displacement. This serves to turn evidence-based data into everyday policy decisions. Another example is the Continental Strategy on Human Mobility in the context of climate change. It is being developed together with the African Union. The strategy aims to ensure that participation of young people, women, people with disabilities, indigenous people, and many other groups is decision-making and implementation processes. In this way, the needs of those most affected should be taken into the decision-making process. Another topic we are working on is support prevention is early warning systems. Initiatives such as the Climate Risk and Early Warning System initiatives are key to prepare people for climate-related events so that fewer people have to leave their homes. These systems improve forecasting, preparedness, and access to timely and actionable information. They help vulnerable communities anticipate and effectively respond to climate risks before human mobility becomes unavoidable. That's only a few examples on prevention and adaptation. Much more is going on with all of you, with all your commitment, and much more we are working on jointly. Second, the aspect of how we respond to climate impacts is our support of safe and dignified mobility. Where climate impacts makes movement unavoidable, we have to act that people can keep their dignity and have a safe migration path. We do so, for example, via the Platform on Disaster Displacement, We support solutions for people who have been internally displaced by disasters, and we help share best practice widely. With many partner countries, I just can point out a few here in that momentum. We have worked jointly and effectively together, for example, with Fiji, where we work with the government and affected communities with relocations that are voluntary and planned, both. Here, especially women's knowledge of household management, food systems, caregiving is key for planning decisions on settlement design and resource access. That is why we ensure that representation, for example, on relocation committees is key, is important for us. Finally, the third element I was just pointing out is the engagement and cooperation with receiving regions and cities. They have the greatest responsibility. One good example I would like to share is our cooperation with Madagascar, where the pressures on resources and receiving communities is increasing and creating challenges for social cohesion. I think everybody can understand what I'm talking about in that context. Local authorities with whom we are working in Balné region are responding to this by developing a regional migration management strategy, by improving access to land, and by strengthening social cohesion between those who are coming and the host communities. And last but not least, by creating income opportunities, especially in the agricultural sector, especially for women and young people. That example shows us how in that example Madagascar and the local can act and is acting at the local level, and how that can make a difference. Under that development, under that cooperation, and under our cooperation with Madagascar, we are supporting that efforts and that work. Ladies and gentlemen, Germany has been an early mover in climate mobility to advance practical solutions and strengthen political recognition. What we have learned over the years is clear. Climate mobility is a defining global challenge of our time, and it is a test of our collective responsibility. Success depends on strong partnerships with governments, international organizations, cities, local authorities, civil society, and most important, directly with the affected communities. I'm very proud to say that Germany therefore strongly supports the global consensus on climate mobility and the principles for which it stands. Let us act early, let us act together so that more families have a real choice whether they want to stay or they want to move to another place. Thank you very much that you're here, and thank you for your engagement.